If you were thinking about doing a sub-2 deal where then you sell in a contract for deed in Kansas, you might want to think twice. Check out what just came out. So here's what we've got. Seller to hold title to property exceptions. Again, this is in Kansas. 2562 is the bill. The bill would prohibit a seller from executing a contract for deed if the seller does not hold fee simple title to the property. That's not that big of a deal. If you don't own it, you can't sell it, right? Doesn't seem like a crazy thing. Except if you were buying on a contract for deed and then selling on a contract for deed. For example, the VA loan. If they can't call due on sale, why wouldn't you buy on a contract for deed in the first place and then sell it on a contract for deed, right? This wraparound contract for deed idea that I came up with a while back. The soft wrap, I call it. Well, this basically busts that strategy out of the water. Stink. Okay, so under normal circumstances, this seems like perfectly reasonable, no problem. Who would ever do that? Well, we have a reason to do it because you can't get due on sale called on a VA loan if you buy it on a contract for deed. If you acquire a 3% interest mortgage on a contract for deed like that, then you sometimes will want to sell it on a contract for deed. It makes complete sense, but you can't do that in Kansas. Now, okay, that's number one. Next, it has to be, so you have to own fee simple title free from any mortgage lien or other encumbrances. Well, that's a loan, a mortgage. You can't sell it if you have a loan on it, unless, there's the exceptions, unless you give notice prior to the execution of the contract for deed, that's closing, and the seller disclosed the liability to the buyer. So, hey, there's a mortgage on this. You know what? That's not actually a big deal. Creative TC has great disclosures. We make sure everybody's on the same page. They're fully disclosed. They acknowledge, they initial all the lines. There's a mortgage. There's a due on sale clause. There's blah, 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 blah. All that stuff. So the seller discloses that to the buyer. No problem. The seller continues to make timely payments. Obviously, also not a problem because it would be criminal to sell a property to somebody and then to not make payments on the underlying debt and to allow it to go to foreclosure. So that's nothing new. Here's my problem. And the seller has to disclose the contract for deed to a party of interest to the liability being the mortgage company. Yes? So now you have to call due on sale on yourself, basically? I don't know. They may not call due on sale. They may not. But you have to notify them of the contract for deed prior to close of escrow. So that stinkles. That stinks a bunch. Violation of this section would be I believe, considered an unconscionable act in violation of the Kansas Consumer Protection Act, by the way, which carries penalties of up to $20,000 or $25,000 per offense. So if you go around doing this, you could be in some pretty big trouble. So now you basically have to notify the lender of your contract for deed situation. Is the Kansas contract for deed for sub-2 sellers busted? If we go back to the VA loan, I'll let you make your decision. But if we go back to the VA loan, let's look at that. If you are the actual owner of the property already and it's your VA loan, not a problem because you can notify the lender all day and they can't call due on sale. So if you're natural owner, natural mortgage holder, mortgagor, and it's a VA loan, you can sell contract for deed to somebody and satisfy all these things and not be at risk of due on sale. Okay, but let's make eye contact here. But if you are not a VA loan, if you are not the original lien holder, if you're buying sub-2, etc., you have to risk due on sale by notifying the bank. So is it dead? Quite possibly. That's possibly a dead strategy. Can you buy it on a contract for deed and sell it subsequently on a contract for deed as a soft wrap? Not really anymore. So I want to caution people to look for these sorts of regulations in other states as well because we're learning as we go. But so what's the solution? I would advocate that you basically have to revert back to actual wraps where title transfers with the property. Now, why would they do something like this, though? Why would they require all this stuff? Well, actually, it's in conjunction with some benefits for contract for deed sellers. The sellers are getting better position and better remedies and rights and stuff. And so what they want to do is up the requirements. So if you want to sell, you have to hit these standards. So it makes sense. It's frustrating for me and my team, but it makes sense. If you're going to sell, you have to step up to this level of compliance, and then we'll also give you this level of improved benefits, protections, rights, etc. So You don't have to foreclose on a contract for deed. You have to give notice period for them to cure, and if they don't cure, then you can just take it back and cause them to forfeit it. No foreclosure. That could really damage a buyer. What if they put in 75% of the total payments required for that property? What if they already paid 75% of, a $250,000 property? They can just lose all that and be forced to walk away? Technically, with this legislation, yes. If you give them, I think it's 90 days notice, and they don't cure within 90 days, you can evict them and their interest is canceled. And that's that. That's very damaging for a buyer. In other states, you would have to foreclose when they're past 30, 40, 50% equity. It depends on what state you're in or how long they've been in the property or how much they've paid. But again, somebody's gaining equity. This is a seller finance arrangement. And so to kick somebody out of a house just because you gave them 30, 60, 90 days notice and they couldn't cure the default, that's a huge loss. And so from a Kansas Consumer Protection Act, I'm thinking maybe the consumer's not very well protected here. And there's going to be more to this 3, 5, 10 years down the line when enough people have been damaged and lost $100,000 in equity. In fact, this has me thinking Texas vibes. Texas basically all but outlawed contract for deed and executory contracts because this was the situation. There were people being predatory, selling to buyers who they reasonably knew could or would default, and then they would just take the property back. And so they constantly sold the property and kept getting it back and reselling. And so these people were taking advantage of others. This is the history of why contract for deed is basically unusable in Texas. And I think Kansas is on the same path 10 to 15 years from now if somebody picks up and starts taking advantage of buyers. Oh, you can barely afford it? Great, come on in. Basically, I actually haven't sold the house because I'm going to get to take it back when you default. It's pretty dirtbaggish. What do you guys think?